Today I'm going to do something that I haven't done before on this channel, which is to talk about one pen and one pen only, and it's also a new pen, meaning it just came out. The pen I'm going to be talking to you about is the new Wahl Eversharp Skyline. It is a pen based on a vintage design that was just re-released in the last couple months. This video is going to be part one of two focused on that pen. So in part one, we're going to talk about the Skyline. And then in part two, you will have my interview with Syd Saperstein, who is, amongst many things in the pen world, the person who revived Wahl Eversharp as a brand after it had been defunct for several decades. In that video, we'll talk about the history of the brand, the history of the Skyline, the history of the design of the Skyline, because as you'll see, it's somewhat interesting and different than other pens. And we will also talk about what Syd did to revive it and where things are today. So I wanted to do this part one, which is just about this pen, for the purpose of giving you context for what will come in part two. So I hope you stick with me through both, but let's get to the Skyline itself right now. I'm Joshua Lax, fountain pen user, collector, a bit like all of Andrews, right? And all-around fanatic. In fact, I'm so obsessed, I started a business where I get to work with other people's pens. But now I want to show you everything I love about the world of fountain pens. From the new pens, to the old pens, the nibs, the ink, the paper, and especially the people. This is Uncapped. The pen comes in a cardboard box. As you see, it has this white sleeve. It says Wahl Eversharp on there. A little more on the name in a second. You remove the sleeve, and you have a very nice box. Also made of cardboard. It has this Art Deco design, which, as you'll learn over the course of this video and the next, is not actually the school of design from which this pen came from, but nonetheless, it is a very nice box. Take off the top. You have a card welcoming you to the heritage of Wahl Eversharp, which existed, as noted here, since 1914. The pen then is in a plastic sleeve, and you take it out, and you have the pen. Let me just tell you a little bit about the pen before we compare it to its predecessors and some other pens that are out there. The pen is basically an aluminum pen. It's anodized. The barrel is here sort of a matte black. It has a glossy plastic section and a stainless steel, basically number 5 size nib that says Eversharp on it. The cap is got this chrome plating here on sort of the body of the cap. It's got a clip that says Eversharp on it. One thing to know is, although this is the Wahl Eversharp brand, the pens were originally sold under they were sold under Eversharp. What you'll find out in my interview with Syd is that Wahl and Eversharp were two different brands. They became one company, but certain pens were sold as Wahl pens, certain pens were sold as Eversharp. The Skyline is one of those that was sold as Eversharp. So to maintain the vintage design of the clip, it says Eversharp on it. And then here, the crown or the finial on the cap, which the clip goes over, is the same anodized aluminum that is located here in the barrel. So that's basically the pen. It is a cartridge converter filler. I believe it comes with a converter. Let's just confirm that for you. Yep, there it is. So that's the basics of the pen. The pen is available in several finishes. So the pen that was in the box is this one here. This has the black anodization on the barrel and the cap finial with a chrome plating on the clip and then the body of the cap. As you can see, there's also gold plating on the clip and the cap bodies that's available. And then as you can see, there is red barrels, blue barrels with the matching finial or crown. The thing I don't have here to show you an example of, there's actually like a stealth model where everything is black plated. So you have like this matte black anodized barrel and finial with a glossy plated clip and cap body. And then I believe the nib is also like a black metal plated nib. So the whole thing is totally stealth. I don't have one here. I wish I did, because it's totally a cool version. One thing I'll just also point out, these pieces, the clips and we'll call them the body of the cap, are glossy finishes. I think pretty much all the barrels and matching finials have somewhat of a matte finish on them, so they're actually quite comfortable to hold. They're not just one big glossy pen. So, the black one here has like a pretty good finish on it. Same here. I would say these colors are slightly glossier, but they're not like completely glossy, so they still retain a little bit of a nice tactile feel when you're using the pen. As I mentioned earlier, the new Wahl Eversharp Skyline is based on a vintage model called the Eversharp Skyline. So, as Syd will explain to us, the original Skylines were sold under the Eversharp brand. And you have two examples here, this one in the front and this third from the front. Both of them are lever fillers, and I have them uncapped so you can kind of see what the differences are and what the similarities are, for that matter. So for one thing, you could see that in this pen, which is actually smaller than all three of these, it's got a very similar cap design to the new Wahl Eversharp Skyline. Here, the larger one, upon which the new pens are based, right? So the dimensions are very similar. They're a little thinner because you don't need to accommodate the filling system that's in here, which is a rubber diaphragm, or known as a sac, that's filled when you press down, or you actually lift up like that. When you fill it, it depresses a bar that's in here, and that causes the sac that's inside, or the diaphragm, to compress. When you release it, it opens up, allowing vacuum pressure to suck the ink into the pen. That filling system has been replaced by the modern converter and cartridge system that a lot of pens use, and requires a little less finesse in the upkeep. But nonetheless, you could see that the dimensions are fairly similar. The other thing you'll notice is that the caps, although similar, are different. Particularly this one here is actually made mostly of celluloid, and that was something that was offered in the original vintage Eversharp Skyline line. These two have gold nibs, somewhat different in design than the steel nibs you have on the new pens, but you can see that sort of the dimensions of where you hold the pen are somewhat similar. And the nibs are both on the smaller size. This one is obviously larger than this one here, but they're sort of in scale with each other. So that is sort of just a quick look at the original Skylines with the new Wahl Eversharp Skyline, and I apologize that the vintage ones are a little bit rough looking. They need to basically be restored. So nibs polished, caps, clips polished, and the filling systems repaired, and the bodies given a little bit of a shine to get them back to what they should be. In any event, there you have the comparison, old versus new. As I also mentioned earlier, Syd revived the Wahl Eversharp brand, or brands, in around 2012 and 2013. And when he did that, he introduced a newer, not the newest, but a newer version of the Skyline. And you see some examples of that here. So these two pens, and I have them next to sort of the corollary in the new Skyline models, are from Syd's original revival of Wahl Eversharp. So let me tell you a little bit about them, what's similar, what's different, etc. So the model here, and I don't remember the names exactly, but this one actually has engraved on the cap, Skyline Demonstrator. So they had a demonstrator model that was made out of acrylic. So here it's red acrylic, and you can see it's somewhat similar to the newer version here that's red aluminum. Big difference between the newer and the older ones. or I should say the original revival and this latest revival, are the nibs. So these nibs are, I think, all mediums. Everything here is a medium. Actually, sorry, the blue is a fine. But these are both mediums, I believe. And you can see that the detail on the nib that's engraved is very different than the one that's here. This one is obviously much more simple. This one is a little more complicated. The other thing was, I believe that these have a little more give to them. Sorry, let me get that into focus. Even better. So you could give it, it had a little play. I wouldn't call them flexible, but just trying to get the glare to make it clear what it is. All right. These nibs are pretty firm. There is no real play on them. You just write, and you should not expect any sort of line variation, which is fine. I don't have any complaints about that. And in fact, I think the nibs on the newest one are better than the nibs that are on the initial revival. So this was the Skyline demonstrator. The other thing you could do with it, sort of not to me all that helpful, but you were able to actually fill it from the back. There's a converter in here that you can actually screw or actuate back and forth using this knob, and kind of look through and see the ink, although you can see that the plastic is pretty dark, so you're not really getting a lot of real clarity in terms of the demonstrator aspect of the pen. In addition to the demonstrator line, there were these aluminum pens that came out in the same time period, and that, I believe, with the exception of this ring around where the nib goes into the section, is pretty much identical to the new Wahl Eversharp Skyline. In fact, I was told that they kept the same dimensions and everything from this pen to manufacture this pen, and it's a good pen. The one thing you'll find out is that these pens were much more expensive than these are. These retail, I think, between like $65 and $80. These pens were all over $200, and part of it was just how and where they were made. These are being made much more efficiently, and the product of pretty high quality but efficient manufacturing. These, I don't really know exactly where they were made, other than that they were made in various factories in Europe and assembled different places. But none of that's really a complaint. I just want to show you kind of the evolution of this from the vintage to Syd's revival to this newest iteration, which is this pen and this pen. 3, 2, 1. So here's just a quick size comparison so you get a sense of how big this pen is relative to other pens. Here you have a Lamy Studio, you have the Wahl Eversharp Skyline, you have a Lamy All-Star, and of course a Kaweco Sport Brass. So you can see that it's shorter than the Lamys, obviously longer than the Kaweco, and it has a fairly streamlined shape because it tapers downward to the back of the barrel. So it's a smaller pen. Uncapped, you can see that the Eversharp is not that much shorter than the two Lamys, but again is significantly thinner. I would say I have large hands. This pen is fairly comfortable to use, but just be aware it is a thinner pen. One other thing I wanted to show you was that the Skyline design, although more unusual in the pen world, has been utilized by other brands. Here you have a Edison Comet, or Edison Penco Comet, and you can see it sort of mimics the shape. It's obviously bigger in dimensions. It's made of all acrylic, but nonetheless you have something that sort of mimics that design, that streamlined design. We come now to probably the most important part of this episode, which is how does the different nibs on these pens write? So I have here a fine nib and a medium nib, and then we have a nib that I will talk about in a second because it presents its own part of how I think about the world, and I'll explain more in a second. These two pens have been inked with Farney's Everwrite ink. I thought the Ever was somewhat appropriate. The other thing is this is kind of like a vintagey blue, so it kind of has a nice pairing for this. Also, I think it's actually made by Private Reserve, which is generally considered a pretty reliable ink. It's been around for a number of years already. And I wanted something new, though, just to see like if things react, you would see it. So that is what these two pens have in them. This one, the third one, again, there's something different that are not like the other two. I've been using this pen pretty regularly over the last month or so. So this one has been inked with Diamine Midnight. I like Midnight ink from Diamine. I like Diamine overall. If you see me at a pen show, I use Diamine a lot. I like it because I know what it's going to do. It is easy to clean, and you generally have a good writing experience, good flow, etc. And I've had enough experience with it, so if I put it into a pen that I'm using for the first time and all sorts of crazy, funky things start happening, I kind of know, it's not necessarily the ink. Like I have enough experience, institutional knowledge with the ink. I will say that you should not worry, nothing funky has happened. It's just I'm saying that I use an ink that I know at least what will happen, or I can make different analyses of what will happen based on that ink. All right, so let's start with this blue and gold pen, and we will show you what the fine writing looks like. So here is the Eversharp Skyline. We'll call it the 2025 because, as you saw, there are many different Skylines out there now. And this is the fine nib, and this was blue with gold cap. So you can hear a little bit of that grain of the paper perhaps coming through, but on the whole, it is a very nice fine nib to write with. One thing I look for, right, is if I go like this, is it scratchy? Meaning, did they finish the top part over here? I've talked about that in other episodes. I do not get that when I'm writing. Side to side feels a little bit rougher, and that may just be because the finishing there is a little different. But overall, it is a nice nib. And I usually don't go in for fine nibs for myself, but right now, I'm saying to myself, this is a pretty good fine nib. Now, granted, I just filled this. I wiped it off, but it is writing very nicely. All right. Before I get carried away, let me move on. Let's look at the medium nib. So here is, just going to adjust things slightly. This is the Eversharp Skyline 2025 M nib, and this is black with chrome. Now, in terms of the differences between these two nibs, I don't see a whole heck of a lot being the difference in terms of line width between the two on this paper. It may be something that comes through better on other papers, but on this Tomoe, it is coming out none too different. But also a very nice writing experience. And again, it doesn't grab when you move it upwards. Side to side feels a little smoother than that fine nib. That may just be because of the way it's finished and because it's got a more rounded profile. But in any event, a very nice nib. Now I want to talk to you about this pen, and I kept referencing that there's something different about it, and the difference actually is nothing more than the fact that I ground this nib to a stub. Now, why did I grind this nib to a stub? Well, when I'm looking at a new pen, especially one that just came out, I can expect to see this at some point in my work as a nib professional. However, I, for myself, both for that purpose, other people, and for myself, want to know how these things grind, because that says to me, some things about the quality of the nib, how well it takes to being put on, you know, a spinning, vibrating machine and the like. And so this one I thought came out quite nicely. And so what I was essentially doing was just testing how does it grind as another metric about the pen. So as I said, this has DME Midnight in it, I believe. So as you see, like I get like a decent amount of line variation, so you get a nice medium stub. It writes a nice wettish line. I'm not going to say it's the wettest writer, but it's good flow. And this one, as I said, I've been using pretty consistently over the last several weeks. So in terms of testing out how these things are longevity-wise, the nibs seem to be pretty good to me. Also, this thing seals pretty well because I've not had to like wet it or anything to reprime the pen. So that's the Wahl Eversharp Skyline. Great little pen. I really enjoy using it. I didn't mean this to necessarily be a review, but I will say that I like this pen. It's fairly affordable. It seems pretty well made. The nibs are good. And obviously, because it's based on a vintage pen, the vintage vibes are there, but it has all the attributes of a modern pen. So I think it should suit people from different camps pretty well. But my point was not to really provide a review. It was more to provide a look at the pen, the previous modern Wahl Eversharp Skylines, and of course some of the vintage ones. And I wanted to do that so that when you watch my conversation with Syd Saperstein, which is to come in the next episode, you would have some context when we talk about the design of the pen, the look of the pen, some of the design attributes that were marketed and things like that, as well as getting a little bit of a primer on the history of Wahl and Eversharp, which will be discussed at some length in our next episode. It should also be interesting from the perspective that you get to hear what it was like or what went into reviving a vintage pen brand that had been extinct for some time. And so we're going to talk about that. My last thing I'll say is thank you to Frank, who's actually helping manufacture these, Frank from Narwhal. And he provided me some of these pens that I showed you today. So I purchased some for myself, but then he provided more so I could give you a look at the variety, different nib sizes, different finishes in this video and for the next one. So thank you to him for providing these items. And I look forward to sharing my conversation with Syd with all of you real soon. Thank you so much once again. Goodbye.